Can you each please state your name and your date of birth?
I'm David Scott. I was born on January 18th in 1947.
And I'm John Jagodowski. I was born December 17, 1948.
We moved to Venice in 1972, and we sort of settled in 19th September, and we knew each other in New York for 5 years or before that. We'd come from New York City, although we'd come actually most recently from San Francisco.
We were living in San Francisco in sort of a commune and Haight-Ashbury, and David had hitchhiked down to LA, and that's how he sort of discovered Venice and the gay crowd there. While he was gone, an old friend from New York was in San Francisco, and he had moved to a tiny town in Colorado up in the mountains at 9,000 feet outside of Boulder, and he convinced us all to come there and live with him. Well, when David came back, he got a red Volkswagen van, fixed it up, and we all got into it and drove to this town in Colorado. And almost immediately, the two of us realized there's no way I'm going to live here with outhouses and no running water, and it snowed in August, kind of. And so we just sort of kept going cross country back to New York and then down to Florida where his parents lived, and then eventually back to Venice and settled in. We found this little tiny bungalow on Cabrillo Avenue that had a sign in the window that just said, "For information about this place." And you want to tell about calling?
Well, I was going to go back a little before that too. No, I will tell that story because it's sort of funny. I actually had been to Venice the first time in 1964 when I was 17. Was on a kind of long extended bus trip, and I wound up in LA. I stayed in a Fleabag hotel. I took a bus down Wilshire Boulevard to the Palisades and spent most of the day on the Santa Monica Pier inside Daisy Clover days. It was, and then I spent a night dancing at POP, and I was just totally enchanted by the California surfer crowd. Except when I get out, it was at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I walked through Venice in the middle of the night. I tried to find a hotel, probably one on Rose and maybe the St. Charles. And they were all resident hotels. Venice was, I think, pretty downscale in those days. And I ended up trying to walk across the Marina Channel, which was not on my map. So I had to go back to Lincoln Boulevard and hitchhike down to Manhattan Beach. And I spent a night at Manhattan Beach and then went body surfing. And that's when I kind of really fell in love with the whole beach town scene. But and subsequent trips, I never knew about Venice. I thought, well, we were both gay in New York, and I always thought, I don't think Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach are going to work. I had no idea about Venice. Then I went to a bar called The Farm, which was the bar in those days, the gay bar, excuse me. And I got picked up by a guy who was nice enough, and kept hoping he was going to invite me home because I had nowhere to stay. And he took me with a bunch of his friends. We went to the Cafe Figaro. And I liked them all. I thought he said he lived in Van Ness. I didn't know what Venice was. And so we got into a big paddle truck. And the reason I'm saying this story was the paddle truck was driven by two lesbians. They were named Fritzy and Candy. And it was Fritzy's truck, and Candy was her girlfriend. They lived on Rialto, but I didn't know that. And we started driving down. I thought we were going across I kept thinking, shouldn't we be going across the mountains to get to Van Ness or whatever? I don't know. And Fritzy was narcoleptic, and so she kept falling asleep
while driving.
While driving, right? And Candy would elbow her and say, "Wake up, Fritzy! Wake up, Fritzy!" And she's, "I'm not asleep. We're not asleep." And that's how I got to Venice. And that's when we walked down the street. We saw this little cottage, and it had this, for information about it. It was sort of, if it catches on fire, let us know. In many ways, where we really count our relationship as really cementing was when we got that house fixed up enough to be able to live in it. And so we moved in, and we were renting, and the backyard was just there were no fences. People used to do if you look at Cabrillo, you realize you could make a shortcut through the house to the yard, and there were no fences, and the backyard had been used for parking cars. It was hard as a rock and just dead, and but we were happy there. It was nice, and I thought, having come from the East Village, I thought it was like I thought it was heaven. There was all bougainvillea everywhere, and Gary Hatcher knew where all the flowers were, and he used to paint them too. So we kind of realized that we were kind of where we needed to be at that moment. When we moved to Venice, we were already out and gay. We had used to being holding hands in the streets of New York. In 1971, we would walk around the streets of New York holding hands. In 1972, we would walk around the streets of San Francisco holding hands. And I had a jacket, an embroidered jacket, which I had embroidered on the streets of Christopher Street, on the steps of Christopher Street, that said "Gay is good" across the back. And when we first got to Venice, we went to Newpar's, which was the restaurant on the corner of Pacific Avenue and Windward on the southwest corner. And I was in there. There was a really handsome dude named Jimmy Hagee, blonde, who was trying to pick me up. But Alan Sarlo, who was one of the major Venice surfers, was in there, walking around shirtless. And he saw "Gay is good," and he nearly choked. When we started walking to the beach, we had a dog. And we'd take the dog down to the beach and avoid the dog catchers. And we would walk between the pavilion and the surfer wall, which was the oil wells. Neither are there anymore, right? We would walk through holding hands, and the surfers went bananas. They just started screaming at us and screaming. A lot of times they would scream, "Roman holiday, Roman holiday," because that was the name of a baths on Venice Boulevard, which was the gay baths. It was horrible. I mean, so we actually backed off from holding hands. We would walk through. I was willing to not hold hands, but I was not willing to not walk through there. So we walked through, and at a certain point, we were not harassed anymore. But I couldn't figure out how to ever make friends with these people. And I kind of liked them. First of all, a lot of them were very nice looking, but they also, it just felt weird to me that I just couldn't even break it. And I got to tell you, a lot of the gay crowd there had nothing to do with the surfers, and a lot of the hippies on the Venice oceanfront had nothing to do with the surfers. There were two different groups. Surfers were certainly not hippies. I took some photos of the kids on my block skateboarding, and they were just kids, and they weren't doing anything at all. But when I gave them the prints, they went loony. They thought, this is the greatest thing ever. So I went out and bought myself a horrible used SLR camera, a Miranda, no lenses fitted, from one of our gay friends. And I went down went in front of the pavilion, and there used to be a bunch of skaters there in front of the pavilion. And I started taking pictures. I did a little tests with people. In fact, one of the first pictures I took was one of the iconic lesbians of Venice named Davy. And I took some pictures of these skaters, and I brought back prints. And they just, all of a sudden, they were my friends. So I brought back more pictures. Up until then, I think only one of that crowd of people ever was nice to us, a guy named Tim Hands. And he was just wanted to have a finger in every pot. So hats off to Tim. The crowd was basically led by Dennis Agnew, who was known as Polar Bear. Although I'm not sure he was Polar Bear in those days quite yet, but probably. It's called Polar Bear because he learned to surf one winter without a wetsuit. And he was the leader of the crew. So I made friends with all these people. I was taking pictures of them. And they were skaters. I'm sure they knew, at least some of them knew I was gay, but they loved having their picture taken, but they really loved getting a print. And then I started trying to take surfing pictures, which I wasn't very good at, but even so, they didn't have to be very good. People went crazy about that. So I would, all of a sudden some surfer dude would be knocking on our door and say, "Hey Dave, I heard you got a great shot of me doing it off the lipper at the South Jetty. Is that true?" And I said, well, yeah, here's the guy. And they were just crazy. So that's really why I started taking pictures. And I was able to learn how to surf because I didn't get chased out of the water by all the Venice locals. As long as I stayed out of their way, they didn't want to get on my wrong side, because after all, I was their source of photographs, of not just being photographed, but having a photograph. I would carry a little manila envelope with 5x7s on my jacket. I always had to have a jacket with a pocket big enough to carry 5x7s. And so from about 1977 through to 1987, when we left Venice, I was just constantly giving away pictures, and I must have given away thousands of them. We won the lottery when we sold our house in Venice. We bought our house in Venice for $19,000.
Which his parents gave us a mortgage.
Yeah, we mortgaged it with my parents' money. I had $1,000 still left from my recording studio job in New York, which I'd held on to just in case. So if we said we had no money, we always had enough money in case, in case.
In 1991, we weren't living in Venice anymore, but we still owned the house. And people started giving us offers. And we sold it. We were not real estate investors or house flippers or anything. We sold it for $235,000.
Right, something like that.
I
So
mean, that's winning the lottery.
That's back then, though.
Right,
So, and they immediately tore it down. The
Right.
thing about our house, one thing about we're most proud of is that when we moved in, it was a mess, and when we left, we had the garden of life. I got to tell you.
We had our little cottage on Cabrillo was right in the front, right on the street, but there was a huge yard behind. It took us a long, long time to get this yard cleaned up. A lot of work, but we had a fabulous garden back there with flowers and vegetables. We had so many vegetables, we handed them out to neighbors.
Right.
You know, do you want a zucchini?
Right, yeah, right. But we had an asparagus bed that John started from seed. Now it takes 3 years for asparagus to start to grow, to actually have asparagus you can eat. And he started them. I thought he was crazy. I thought, yeah, it's a little wooden box. You can't get asparagus. We had the most amazing asparagus.
And since we were doing this gardening business all over Venice, we met lots of different people from all walks of life. There was one of my favorites was Mario Cimini, who was an Italian opera singer, or retired opera singer, who lived on, was it Rialto?
He lived right next to Tom's
Right,
little
right. The
storefront
house
over
he
there.
lived in was rented from Tom, who lived next door.
Our house, as I say, it was just a little shack, but it was a nice house. And we ended up fixing it up. We didn't fix it up because we were rich people coming in from outside gentrifying. We fixed it up because we lived in it. We wanted it to be nicer. So it's a weird mixture. So, I mean, it was nice, but it was, I think I liked it better when we first moved there, but by the end, it was getting a little difficult. So, I mean, so that's what I would say. It was a paradise, but it was not a paradise by a lot of people's standards. It was a paradise by our standards.